Welcome to Undivided. I'm Brandi Kruse. Thank you for being here on this Friday. Happy Friday to you. Thank you for your continuing commitment to give common sense a comeback. If you've not become an Undivided subscriber already, it's a great opportunity to support journalism that is helping bring common sense back into news and into the political conversations. You can do it for as little as $5 a month at patreon.com/undivided, or by becoming a contributor on my locals community, brandikruse.locals.com. Thank you to the founding sponsor of Undivided, 1530 Mortgage. Visit them at 1530mortgage.com. We're going to talk about crime today. We've been discussing a lot some of the policies that were pushed starting in 2020, moving into 2021 in response to the death of George Floyd, and how there is now a bipartisan effort to reel some of that back in. Now, it's just bipartisan by a little bit, just a tad, but we'll take it. I'm also going to make a little mea culpa for a segment I did on the Wednesday subscriber-only episode about appreciating some more progressive Democrats who are at least consistent on the issue of police funding. I included Congresswoman Jayapal of Washington State in on that, and some of you pointed out that I completely left out the fact that she had gotten increased security after she was threatened at her home. And so I'm going to discuss a little bit of that. Also, a tweet that Congresswoman Jayapal sent out today about how Democrats are the party who cares about working people. We're going to discuss whether that's fair for her to say. But first, on the issue of public safety, there was this video that came out, and I posted it on my social media pages, so you might have seen it already, but we want to talk about it on the podcast today. It was put out by the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office and Sheriff Adam Fortney, who is, a tough on crime sheriff, certainly. But it was a bipartisan video. It featured mayors, mostly mayors in Snohomish County, above, that's the county above King, where Seattle's at. Talking about their concerns about some of the police reform legislation that was pushed through by the Democratic majority in Olympia in 2021 and some of the unforeseen consequences of it. One of the pieces of legislation that has been most roundly criticized is one that makes it nearly impossible for police to pursue a suspect, to engage in a vehicle pursuit. Basically, the only instances they can do that is if there's probable cause of a violent crime or that it's a sex crime. And so if the person in that case flees, then they're able to pursue a vehicle. But other than that, they can't. And it has resulted in a record number of suspects just driving away from traffic stops. So this video comes out. It also features, and you'll see here, Cassie Franklin, who's the mayor of Everett, Washington, and she is certainly not Republican. She is a progressive Democrat. And so when I saw her in this video, I thought, wow, that makes a statement, because it is not just moderate Democrats, it's not just Republicans pushing back against these laws. You are now starting to see more politicians realize the disastrous consequences. So I want to play that video for you in full.
Police, open the door. Police. Open the door. Open the door. Hey, open the door. Nope, he's putting in gear. He's going. Don't do it. And he's gone. Oh, he's crashed. He's crashed. Nope, he's gone.
Yeah, he came close to him.
Yeah, are you all right?
I'm good.
Okay.
In 2021, the Washington State Legislature banned most police pursuits unless it was for a violent crime or sex offense. While this might sound reasonable, the reality is that public safety decreases as criminals become more brazen, knowing the police cannot pursue them to enforce the law.
My fellow Snohomish County mayors and I share a deep and growing concern for the safety of our communities due to the tide of rising crime we are seeing.
In other news tonight, the city of Spokane, Spokane County, and the state of Washington all seeing a big spike in car thefts right now.
Vehicle thefts increased 88% for the first 3 months of this year.
Here in Bellingham, the numbers are astronomical.
Statewide, in the first 2 months of last year, there were about 4,500 car thefts. This year, nearly double that, believed to be a new record.
I have never seen criminals as emboldened as they are now.
The Washington Association of Sheriffs and Police Chiefs point to a state Supreme Court decision that decriminalized the possession of small amounts of drugs and law enforcement reform laws that forbid police from pursuing someone in a stolen car.
Our mayors, law enforcement, and the community asked for help, and the legislature made the specific decision to continue to allow for blatant disregard of the law.
Law enforcement's deeply concerned that some policing reforms may have had unintended outcomes.
We are witnessing actual crimes like the ramming of police cars as criminals attempt to get away. This is both dangerous for law enforcement and for the public at large.
The reality is, criminally minded people are taking advantage of the new laws and creating more victims as a result.
And with the recent Blake decision at the state Supreme Court and the lack of a fix by the state legislature, we now have a scenario where it's very difficult to get individuals who are struggling with a drug addiction into treatment.
We're seeing a rise in drug addiction. We're seeing a rise in fentanyl overdoses, and not just overdoses, but deaths.
The Blake decision makes it practically impossible for our officers to enforce the law.
The direction of public safety in the state of Washington is leading to a mass exodus of police officers in nearly every jurisdiction.
The criminal justice system needs action and support by all.
Laws preventing police pursuits make arresting these car thieves a challenge, and low staffing numbers mean resources are already spread thin.
If current laws stay the same, we're going to continue to see a crisis in public safety staffing.
Fewer police officers means less ability to provide justice for victims. They need to know we are here for them when they call.
Chelan County was one of the first jurisdictions adversely affected by this new legislation. Our suspect was able to steal a school bus and simply drive away from us. Instead of apprehension earlier on in his crime spree, he was allowed to commit further crimes and destroy his house, also belonging to his spouse and children. This was completely preventable.
There are some criminal suspects that need to be apprehended while their crimes are being committed to prevent further victimization to our communities.
We need to take a balanced approach to this public safety issue.
No one wants more pursuits, which are inherently dangerous. But current law has created an atmosphere of defying the law even on simple traffic stops.
There is a victim behind every one of these crimes, and they need us to take action so their voices can be heard.
Victims of auto theft are too often those who can least afford it. With older cars, with fewer anti-theft systems, with less insurance coverage, and with greater impacts on their lives.
Recently, the state of New Jersey reversed its prohibition on police chases, precisely because of the same increases in crime and that the perception that fleeing the police was an encouragement to commit crimes.
It's important to evaluate these laws to see what is working and what is not.
We are not advocating for more pursuits. We are advocating for more police authority to engage in pursuits so the criminal action is not given a free pass.
As your local elected officials and leaders in public safety,
we're asking for your help.
We're asking for your help.
We're asking for your help.
We are asking for your help in getting our community
on a better path for public safety.
Our government works best when we
as a community participate in the process, and the time is now.
And the time is now.
And the time is now.
The time is now.
Please reach out to your local representatives
and urge them to change the current laws
in support of public safety and providing justice for victims.
Please join us in advocating for safer communities.
So what we're starting to see is this building, I think, momentum, this building pushback to have state lawmakers in Washington, specifically the Democratic majority, come back into session in January of this year and rethink this pursuit law in particular. I think there are a lot of other things for them to do in regards to public safety, but the pursuit law in particular. And to, again, put that issue back in the hands of jurisdictions to decide when an officer can and cannot pursue a suspect. You know, we all agree that you want to have as few police pursuits as possible. They're dangerous to the public at large. They are dangerous to the law enforcement officers who are engaging in them. And one of the arguments I've made in regard to the pursuit law being as strict as it is, if you're someone who's willing to flee from law enforcement, even if it's like a stolen vehicle. So stolen vehicle, you could argue, is not a violent crime, and so why would you pursue? Some people call it a property crime. But if I'm willing to A, steal a vehicle, and B, flee from law enforcement through, flee at high speeds maybe through a residential area, I have become a danger to the community. That's my argument in this. So limiting it to probable cause that they've committed a violent crime, for instance, is such a high bar when there are a lot of people below that bar who are a danger to the community, and we've seen that. And this video, when it came out, it reminded me of just a few months ago. You might recall we did an interview on unDivided with a bipartisan group of mayors that are in charge of cities south of Seattle that came out and said, look, this law is having disastrous consequences on public safety in our cities. Here's a clip of that group interview.
I know some of these new ideas are intended to make safer. I'm hearing from them, they're not feeling any safer. In fact, they're feeling less safe. So this needs to be a discussion with not just those really loud voices to the far left or to the far right. It needs to be those of us that live our lives in the middle and want common sense approaches and accountability for everyone. Our communities are not safe right now.
So to me, this is really reaching a fever pitch, this pushback. Democrats in Olympia can't say anymore that this is just Republicans or law enforcement who are angry about the impacts of these policies. It is now progressive Democrats, moderate Democrats, moderate Republicans, and, further to the right Republicans who are pushing back against this and saying, hey, this needs to be fixed. So there is no excuse at this juncture for them not to go back to the drawing board and hopefully in a bipartisan fashion, working in concert with law enforcement to figure out what the best wording of this would be. I hope Democratic lawmakers in Olympia are listening and that they will find a fix to this that doesn't jeopardize public safety. All right, I want to start with a little mea culpa, and acknowledge that I'm not perfect. I forget things. I have terrible takes, but I'm willing to come back and correct them. So some of you pointed out, I did this segment on the subscriber-only episode on Wednesday about this complete 180 some Democrats are taking on public safety without any acknowledgement that they made mistakes or didn't speak up or whatever. So anyway, I was talking about the show about how I have more respect for some of these progressive Democrats who didn't change their stance on police defunding at all. Like Congresswoman jayapal, she's holding up a national bill that would help fund police agencies across the country. And she's taken the same position now as she did in 2020, which is she doesn't want to give law enforcement agencies more money. And I was saying how, look, I respect that because at least it's morally consistent as opposed to someone like Dow Constantine coming out and pretending like he never took money away from the King County Sheriff's Office and then came back 2 years later and tried to give more money to the King County Sheriff's Office. But then some of you pointed out something that I had totally forgotten about, even though I talked about it on the podcast, the fact that Congresswoman jayapal, she had a guy who came to her house in Seattle and obviously she felt threatened and her family felt threatened. And she ended up getting additional security outside her home. This was something that was done in concert with the Capitol Police and the Seattle Police Department. And so, there was a lot of discussion at the time about how, okay, yes, she deserves and needs additional security at her home. No member of Congress should feel like they're threatened because of what they do, or their families shouldn't feel threatened because of what they do. And so, it wasn't an argument that additional security in that instance was appropriate, but it was sort of this, well, isn't that a little hypocritical considering you're in favor of police defunding, which would make other people feel unsafe in their homes and in their communities. And so here I was giving Congresswoman jayapal all this credit for being morally consistent on the issue. And then you guys reminded me, Brandi, did you not forget? Did you forget about the fact that she got additional security outside her home? So that is a very good point. Thank you for bringing up that point and for reminding me that I had forgotten it. Speaking of Congresswoman jayapal, she put out this tweet today that I want to talk about. She put out a tweet that says, Republicans are preparing lawsuits right now to prevent 43 million Americans from receiving long overdue and necessary student debt relief. She goes on to say, as if it wasn't clear already, there's only one party fighting for working people. Okay. You already know how I feel about student loan forgiveness. I don't think it's a solution at all. I think it amounts to a bribe for people before the midterm election. But let's just really hone in on that last sentence. As if it wasn't clear already, there's only one party fighting for working people. She sends that out on the same day that the stock market drops below 30,000 for the first time since 2020, since Joe Biden was in office. You've got inflation that's at a 40-year high. Gas prices, although they are dipping a little bit, have been atrocious throughout the summer. You have a lot of that fueled by the runaway spending that has happened in Congress under the watchful eye of Democrats. And so you have a period of time, I mean, mortgage rates, where are mortgage rates? Like above 5-6%. You have a time where a lot of hardworking Americans are really struggling. A lot of hardworking Americans who aren't going to be getting student debt forgiveness, who maybe didn't go to college, didn't take out student loans, worked hard to make sure that they didn't have to take out student loans. And Congresswoman Jayapal, at this moment in America, is going to say, as if it wasn't clear already, there's only one party fighting for working people. Talk about lack of self-awareness. There's another element to that I feel absolutely compelled to bring up. And that is the fact that Democrats are the party firing working people for not having a COVID vaccine. And I'm not talking about a year ago. I'm talking about right now. There was a story out today about members of the Coast Guard right now being let go because they do not have the COVID-19 vaccine. There was a story out this past week about hundreds of teachers in New York City being fired because they don't have the COVID-19 vaccine. Are those not hardworking, working-class Americans, Congresswoman Jayapal? I thought that Democrats love teachers. Do they not? Are teachers not working-class Americans? Don't Democrats say they fight for teachers? Yet it is Democrats who are firing hardworking, working-class Americans for not having a vaccine for a pandemic that at this point the President of the United States has said is over. This is the article from the New York Post. 850 more unvaccinated NYC teachers and aides fired for not complying with mandate. The city's Department of Education fired an additional 850 teachers and classroom aides to bring the total to around 2,000 school employees in New York City who did not comply with the vaccine mandate. I mean, that is absolutely absurd at this juncture in the pandemic. How is this fighting for working class Americans? And the Coast Guard as well. Coast Guard folks aren't paid hand over fist. Here's the article from Fox News. Coast Guard discharging unvaxxed members, allegedly denying promotions despite religious exemption requests when it comes to the COVID-19 vaccine. Again, Joe Biden himself said the pandemic is over. And we know that COVID vaccines do not prevent people from getting COVID-19. They do prevent you from getting seriously ill or dying, but at that point, that's a personal decision that you're making. So again, let's go back to Congresswoman Jayapal's tweet. If it wasn't clear already, there's only one party fighting for working people. Stock market below 30,000. Mortgage rates out of control. Inflation at a 40-year high. Gas prices out of control. People's 401ks down 25%. Tell me again how Democrats are the only party fighting for working people in this country. Every Friday, I bring on an interesting friend of mine to talk about news and politics or whatever floats our boat. Really excited about today's guest, former Seattle Police Chief Carmen Best. Carmen Best, welcome to Fridays with Friends.
I am glad to be here, Brandi. Thank you for letting me join you.
I only feel bad it took me so long to ask. You've been a busy lady. What are you up to these days for folks who aren't familiar with what you've been doing since you left SPD?
Well, yeah, I'm working at Microsoft as their Director of Global Risk Security Ops. So that's my day job and my full-time job where I am now. But I also still am doing a lot of work on the policing front. So still doing some law enforcement analyst work for one of the cable networks. And then just recently, I was over in Dublin for the International Association of Chiefs of Police on a consortium of police leaders from around the world. Chief Diaz was there, by the way, too, and just talking about cultural transformation and trends in policing. It was really fascinating, so that was fun.
Do you ever see yourself making a foray back into law enforcement?
I don't, not as maybe as a chief, but I certainly, you know, after 30 years, I just, you know, I still am connected to the field of policing very much. So we'll see. I don't know. I don't know what's next.
You mentioned Chief Diaz there. For people who don't know, Adrian Diaz became, well, he's about to become the official chief, but he is the one who the mayor selected to be the official chief. I know he's a friend of yours. Is he up to the task?
I think he's up to the task. I think he is the right choice for Seattle. I really do. I couldn't imagine, one, bringing on somebody who isn't familiar with the culture of the city, which you know can be, you know, pretty dicey at times, just to try to maneuver that. And all this happened in the department. And Adrian's really been at the forefront of a lot of the discussions, the decision making, the community building from the beginning. And that's not to derogate the other candidate. They're all, you know, qualified, but I think he's the best qualified.
One of the criticisms I know people have had of him is that, you know, when you were in the running to be chief, you had done so many things in the department, you know, had so many other roles, you know, out in the field. And I know some people have criticized that maybe he hasn't done as much field work as some chief candidates have. Do you think that's a fair criticism?
Well, I can say maybe he hasn't, but I can tell you he has been on the forefront of pretty much, you know, in the behind the scenes kind of way. And I know this because I, you know, worked with him for years on so many initiatives within the organization. He really is in tune with what's happening there. He worked on the floor, I say on the floor, but on the 8th floor, a lot, you know, in the past, helping, you know, with the outreach and, you know, looking at different information that we were looking at for investigations. And so I think he's well qualified. I really do. You know, you don't have to, you know, spend every day in patrol to understand what patrol does and understand the uniqueness of it. And he did spend time in the field. I don't think they're giving him a fair shake on that piece.
You know, because you guys are friends and you had just talked about how, you know, navigating Seattle's, you called it a dicey climate. I think that's being generous. But as his friend, why didn't you tell him to just run away? Why'd you let him do this?
You know, it's so funny. He's been there. He's seen from, you know, the good, the bad, the ugly from the beginning, and still wants to do the job. So when you have that sort of that calling, that fire in your belly to do the work, I mean, it's in many ways it's a gift, it's a calling, and so you know, he wanted to do it, and I think he's well qualified to do it.
You know, it's been, gosh, it's so funny because it feels like time has flown by, but it's been about 2 years since you left SPD, is that right?
2 years.
Yeah. And even though things were really messed up at that time, you know, coming out of the summer of 2020, crime is inarguably worse than it was then. Violent crime in particular has gone up. What do you make of the state of crime in the city that you used to be the chief for?
Well, people get mad at me, but I say some of this was really predictable in my view. Before leaving, I just thought the whole issue, the whole idea of, and I said it publicly, so I don't mind saying it again, that the disrespect that was sort of being, you know, promulgated against law enforcement generally, and certainly as Seattle officers, it didn't help with, you know, public safety. And I could have told you from the beginning, less officers is not going to make us any safer. And just this morning, I heard Chief Diaz say they've lost over the last 2 or 2.5 years, 475 officers. And so there's going to be a direct effect from that. There just will be. And so I think, while I am all for, you know, looking at reforms and revamping things and all of that, it was never a good idea to run the officers away.
Yeah,
and
I
of course,
I like the way you phrase that, because the people will come out in response to that and say, well, they didn't defund all those officers. Those officers left on their own, but it was like defunding by virtue of their rhetoric, with people saying, well, I'm not going to continue to work here. You know, you mentioned the hundreds of officers that have left, and I know the new mayor, Bruce Harrell, has, you know, said that he's, you know, trying to start this aggressive campaign to recruit and to retain. How do you even start to make up, though, for that deficit?
Well, it's going to be a real challenge, Brandi. You have no choice but to try, but I think they're going to have to look at, you know, how they're going to, you know, help market and brand and get so people will actually apply for the job. and treat the people who are there well so they don't continue leaving in droves. Many of those are retirements, but those folks could have stayed longer. I think the circumstances, led them to retire at the time that they did. They certainly led me to retire when I did, so that, and then, and really looking for, public-private partnerships, utilizing technology. I bring it up only because I was just saying, when I started, I had a 6-shooter, literally a 6-shooter and handcuffs. That was what they gave us. And, since that time, I mean, as you know, there's body-worn camera, there's in-car video, there's augmented reality, there's artificial intelligence, there are drones, autonomous vehicles. I mean, there's so much technology and so much ability out there to help enhance and make the job a little easier, a little safer. And they're going to have to start finding ways to utilize that as much as possible. It's a deep hole to dig out of. And so it's going to take a lot of collaboration and partnerships to provide public safety.
One of the things, I've known you for years now, and I still could not tell you I have no idea what your politics are. I know that you're common sense, but I couldn't say for sure how you vote, which is probably a good thing considering the job that you had for so long. But I do know that you care about common sense. There are almost all 7 of the 9 council members in Seattle are going to be up for re-election next year. What would your advice be to Seattle voters as they, go into that election year, kind of considering what kind of city they want?
Yeah, well, one, consider what kind of city you want. Are things better than they were before? Maybe they're starting to improve a little bit. And I would really want people to look at, what politicians said and did in the past, because often people, I don't want them to forget, there were folks out there who wanted to not have any sort of consequences for misdemeanor crime, and people who were promoting defunding the police department, and people who wanted to lay officers off, and people who wanted to, who had suggested that we lay off the officers that were not minority, and so all of those things, I think that needs to be considered. And then people are kind of cast the votes the way they want to. But, our memories can be short. And I really would hope that, the full gamut of what the policies and issues are need to be considered.
We've been talking about that on the podcast a lot lately, and it's amazing how people's memories are short, voters, but politicians rely on that. And they'll take a totally different tone in an election year and just hope that voters aren't smart enough or something to go back and look at the things they said. Lisa Herbold comes to mind. She was one of the ones who ran on a platform in 2019 of we're going to hire more officers, turned around 6 months later and said we're going to defund by 50%. And it was like people had forgotten what she campaigned on. Do you believe that there is enough political will in the city to change course on public safety in a meaningful way?
I do. I mean, I sat in a meeting today, and so many people, just like you, just like me, care deeply about the city, about public safety, about quality of life issues, and some of it's definitely police related, but some of it is also dealing with mental health and drug addiction and poverty and all those things, and the intersection of all that, let's just not all dump it on the cops to handle. There have to be other resources there. And I think people want to see, they want to see that kind of change. I was just reading today, and I'm talking to a friend of mine where there's an article that said people are leaving Los Angeles and San Francisco because of the quality of life issues, the things we're talking about now. So, and I think people have reached their limit, and they want to see some sort of solutions that are compassionate and caring and all those things, but also address their quality of life.
Yeah, I laugh when, you have some progressives who say, they don't want police dealing with homeless people or the mentally ill. It's like, well, police don't want to do that either, but it's sort of been thrust upon them to deal with these crises that previously, weren't part of the job description. I asked you earlier if you'd ever consider getting back into law enforcement, but on a different note, people tell me all the time that they want you to run for something. Have you ever considered politics?
Of late, I think about it. Absolutely, I do. But it's the right niche, the right time, then I would definitely consider it. Because what I've found in stepping away is that I'm very, very passionate about what happens in community. It's a sense of fulfillment, knowing that we're making a difference or trying to anyway. So we'll see, right? We'll see.
Wow, that was not a hard no, which I was expecting.
Never. No, actually, I'm a little older now, and I think that there might be a place at some point.
I love that, man. There's a U.S. Senate seat up for grabs in 2024 that would just have your name right on it. So when you want to run for something, I'm all in on Team Carmen.
Thanks, Brandi.
Last time we had you on, we talked about your book. For people who have not read it, remind them kind of what the book was about and what they'd get out of it.
Yeah, it's Black in Blue, Leadership Lessons on Breaking Barriers and Racial Reconciliation. So it's a little bit of a little bit of my own history and my own life story, but also a lot of the lessons on leadership that I think I can pass on to others. We all have a story, but I think there's some real key lessons that I've learned over time, and I'm still learning in some ways. And I talk a bit about the chop and the chaz and what it was like to sort of go through that period of time in Seattle. I don't give every single detail, but I think a pretty decent overview.
And is there a second book in your future?
I think so. It's so funny. After you write a book like that, I'm finding a million other things I want to write about. So I'm just sort of honing in on what the topic would be, but I definitely think there'll be something else coming out.
All right. Well, Carmen Best, we appreciate it. I saw you a few weeks ago, and you were this crazy lady. I was just down the street from my studio, and I'm sitting there getting gas, and I'm buried in my phone, in my car, and there's this crazy person waving like wild in front of my windshield, and I'm trying to ignore him because I'm like, wow, here's some insane person. I look up, it's you.
So maybe technically you were right, But it was pretty funny. I thought it's so random that I would just see you, in Kirkland. And I thought, oh, there's Brandi. Well, let me just say before we say eating goodbyes here is that I really appreciate your show and what you're doing and your perspective and the people that you're bringing on. And I try to listen every week. I think it's incredibly valuable to have, all, views represented, and you do a great job of it.
Well, I appreciate that, and I'll give you the check for saying that later on. Carmen Best, thank you for joining us on Fridays with Friends.
Thanks. Enjoyed it.
It's Friday. That means it's time to check in on what's happening in the state of Florida.
It's not even controversial anymore.
People know in Florida their freedoms are going to be respected.
Joining us is our Florida-based correspondent, my sister Miranda. Hello to you.
Hello.
I just thought we'd start by kind of weighing in on, because we didn't do a segment last week because it was a best of episode, and so I didn't get a chance to talk to you about Governor DeSantis flying migrants to Martha's Vineyard. How did that go over among the Floridians?
Just like every other political move anybody ever makes, half of the people are totally cool with it, and half of the people absolutely hate it. And there's a few of us in between that are just like, what's going on?
Well, because you and I talked about previously how, both of us don't like the using human beings as political pawns, which it's hard to argue that this isn't that to a certain extent. But do you think it's serving to, I guess, wake people up, to what's happening at the southern border?
I mean, I think that it does bring people into the conversation that were, probably pretty stagnant on the sidelines about it, because you can't turn on the TV or go on social media without reading about it and hearing about it. And because I think it is kind of a humanitarian topic, a lot of people kind of have an opinion on it, whether it's one way or another. My thing is that it's one thing to open people's eyes to a topic, but if you're not offering them any sort of education or real world conversation on what they're actually going to do, what purpose this serves, what are you doing this for? Then what's the point, of opening people's eyes to something, just to make us all upset or, trying to prove something wrong? But there's never any follow up to this kind of stuff. You know what I mean? And it really sucks when this kind of thing has people involved, because there's human lives that are being thrown around, and they're just kind of in like a waiting period. And I don't know, it really bothers me. I don't like it at all. Like, I just don't.
Yeah, I can see what you say about like it's a stunt, but then what? I will say from the opposite perspective, I'm surprised actually that more Republicans aren't upset with some of the busing of these migrants into sanctuary jurisdictions, because essentially what you're doing is you're putting these people in, bringing them into the interior of the country to jurisdictions that aren't going to track them or anything. And so to me, it seems almost counterproductive for Republicans to support a stunt like that, because now you're just expediting the release of these migrants into the country with no tracking whatsoever. I will say, I did have to kind of laugh at the response of Martha's Vineyard. I mean, I know there were some folks there who like stepped up to help, but there was this one woman like operating the kind of shelter who was like, we can't accommodate them. And I'm like, well, how many came? And it was 50. I'm like, one mansion on Martha's Vineyard could accommodate 50 people. So it was just this very funny thing.
It was. I think it's one of those things that like now that they showed up on these people's doorstep, these people might get more involved in the conversation in general, because if they don't want them there has to be a solution about where they go. And you can't have that conversation without understanding the whole mess that comes with it. So I think it will, like you said, open some eyes up. And I'm curious of what it'll do to DeSantis, to his campaign, because he's got there's a lot of Latin Americans in Florida. And I don't know if this is something that will make them have a bad taste in their mouth to DeSantis, treating these people like that, or if they view it like, this is something we have to do. It's a rude awakening. Now people are talking. Like, I don't know how people are going to respond to that locally here in Florida.
Yeah, and on the Wednesday subscriber-only episode, we had Jorge Ventura on, who is a field reporter for the Daily Caller, and he's been down in El Paso and now in Eagle Pass, Texas at the border. And, he's been seeing firsthand, and for folks who haven't listened to that interview, it's really fascinating. He's been seeing firsthand the small towns along the border who are inundated with not 50 migrants, but thousands, tens of thousands. And it's like nobody cares whether they can accommodate them. They don't have a choice. And so that's why I kind of look at Martha's Vineyard like, you know what, you can deal with 50 people. But anyway, switching gears a little bit, there is an opioid crisis that's touching, jurisdictions across the country, regardless of politics. It's not, it's Washington state has an opioid crisis. Deep red states have an opioid crisis. And now the federal government is offering some support financially to states to deal with it, right?
Yes, they are. The Biden administration is directing $1.5 billion in state funding to help fight the opioid crisis locally for the states to kind of deal with as they see fit. I'm curious as to how people are going to use this money. I'm curious to see if, it's the same problem, but I'm assuming all states are going to have kind of a different approach at how they're going to use these funds to actually, fight the crisis in a real way.
And the reason we're talking about it on Florida Report is because there are two states that got the most amount of money, more than $100 million each. And it's two states that could not be more different, California and Florida. They both got around $100 million. And I think you make a good point. I guarantee the states are going to spend that money in dramatically different ways. And so I think this is a head-to-head test, a head-to-head comparison about whose tactics work better.
For sure. And you'd want to, one would think that, Newsom and DeSantis would call each other on this and be like, all right, like, what are your plans, in finding some common ground on a situation in any sense. But we know that's not going to happen. I did read that Florida has plans about creating like an app or like a website based community that makes it easy for people to find treatment facilities, just general education, which I can't believe doesn't really exist, but it does, just not on some sort of like main hub kind of a thing. I mean, I hope that some of that also goes into just like basic education and preventative measures too, because it's one thing to like help people who are fighting the opioid crisis, but it's a whole other thing to try to cut it off at the head and pull it out by the root and figure out where can we stop these people from like going in these directions to begin with, so we don't have to keep spending $1.5 billion every couple years to try to fight this this problem.
And there will be some restrictions on how the money used. That's how it works when federal money flows into the states. And so I'm sure there will be some stipulations as to how the money has to be used, but no doubt it's going to be different. So we'll have to follow up on this story when both states come out with their plan on how to spend $100 million and compare and contrast the two. One interesting story you messaged me about. So we talked on the show about Miami Mayor Francis Suarez. I wrote an op-ed about how I think he'd make a fantastic addition to a presidential ticket. Maybe not, a presidential contender right now, to go from the mayor of a city to president. But I think he definitely would make a great president someday. And apparently Kanye West agrees with me.
He does. He did an interview last week with ABC News in which he said, well, they asked him if he would put in another bid for presidency. And he said, I met Mayor Suarez down in Miami and I thought he'd make a really good president also. So he didn't say whether or not he'd go for president again. But, it seems that when people meet Mayor Suarez, they tend to really enjoy him. So he's definitely has quite the reputation building in the Republican Party. It'll be interesting to see what happens with them.
And Kanye West, he's crazy, but he's a genius. And so if he and I have the same opinion by the transitive property, that means that I am also a genius, I think.
Most geniuses are absolutely insane. So it all just kind of works out.
Our dad, I think, was in that camp. He was so brilliant, but he was obviously not well.
Yes, absolutely. He was a very smart man.
All right, let's end with a Florida animal story, because why not? It's Friday.
It's true. So Newsweek is bringing the whole country into the loop with our huge issue of invasive iguanas. Our problem is so bad that our mayor on Miami Beach in particular is thinking about offering bounties for people who hunt and kill them, which is really honestly very sad, but there are a lot of them. They grow 5 to 6 feet long. They eat everything, both like insects and other lizards, in addition to all the plants and flowers. And they also tear apart seawalls, which if you pay attention to our crisis for the environment at all, we need our seawalls pretty bad. So we have a problem. And they're thinking about just letting people solve it on their own terms and maybe even paying them to assist with that. So
I guess that confuses me because, where does an iguana belong if not in Florida?
Well, I think that's up for argument, because if they got here and they live here and they thrive here, then one would probably say they belong here, but they don't. They come from the Caribbean, they come from South America, Central America. They blame the problem, of course, on people through produce trades. They come in on ships carrying, fruit and vegetables, and they get here and they thrive. And then also, of course, the exotic pet trade, which is the source of many of our issues here in Florida when it comes to invasive fish, animals, birds. People want them as pets, realize they can't keep them, and they're just like, okay, enjoy the weather and put them outside. And they actually do very well. So I think there's a problem there, and we can kill as many as possible, but if people aren't trying to figure out a way to stop them from coming in, then I don't know, we'll do it forever. It'll be a war forever.
Yeah, that bums me out. Do you remember the one time we went to Key West? I think it was for my 30th birthday, and we were taking pictures by some rocks, and all of a sudden we look over, and 3 feet away from us on these rocks was this giant ass. Was it an iguana?
It was Godzilla, but I believe
it was huge.
It was very big. It was actually one of the largest ones I think I've seen. And it blended in perfectly to the coral rocks. We didn't even see it. It's in the pictures. And then as soon as he sees us, darts into the water and they swim. They swim away. So they climb trees, they run, they swim. They're not quite apex predators, but they're doing really well down here. So we have an issue.
Yeah, that scared the hell out of me. All right, Miranda, good stuff this week. We'll follow up again on what happens with that money for the opioid crisis. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Have a good weekend.
It's not even controversial anymore.
People know in Florida their freedoms are going to be respected.
We always end our show on Fridays with our segment Understanding America, where we read an important document from the country's history to try to better understand this wonderful country of ours. I wanted to talk about espionage today. Espionage. I don't know why I said it's so creepy. Espionage. because there's been a lot of conversation about the Espionage Act as it relates to the raid on former President Donald Trump's home at Mar-a-Lago and what kind of criminal charges he could potentially face. People are talking about the Espionage Act. And that's because the Espionage Act and some subsections of it were cited on the search warrant, that the redacted version of the search warrant that was released to the public. And so what I wanted to do today is read specifically the portions of federal law that were referenced in that search warrant. Because, when the phrase Espionage Act comes up, it sounds like the former president's being accused of espionage. But there are so many aspects of that act that don't specifically speak to someone betraying their country. You know what I mean? And so in this instance, you can have classified documents that maybe you weren't supposed to have, but not have tried to give them to a foreign enemy of the United States to be charged with something under the Espionage Act. And so what I want to make sure of is, as the talking heads and the media talk about espionage, that everyone understands the context under which this search warrant happened and what kind of possible charges the former president might face. And so a little background. So the Espionage Act was passed in 1917, and right now it lives under Title 18 of the U.S. Code, which relates to crime and criminal procedure. So there were several aspects of the Title 18 that were referenced in the search warrant, and I want to read two of them. So again, the idea is that when this comes up, you have a good understanding of specifically what the DOJ cited in its justification for this search warrant against former President Donald Trump. So I want to start with Title 18 of the U.S. Code, Section 2071, Title 18, Section 2071, which was referenced in the search warrant affidavit. I guess we can cue the patriotic music as usual. It seems a little weird to use the patriotic music in this context, so we'll just put it down really low. Okay, Title 18 of the U.S. Code, Section 2071. Whoever willfully and unlawfully conceals, removes, mutilates, obliterates, or this is actually what it says, or destroys or attempts to do so, or with intent to do so, takes and carries away any record, proceeding, map, book, paper, document, or other thing filed or deposited with any clerk or officer of any court in the United States, or in any public office, or with any judicial or public officer of the United States, shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 3 years, or both. It goes on to say, whoever having the custody of any such record, proceeding, map, book, document, paper, or other thing, willfully and unlawfully conceals, removes, mutilates, obliterates, falsifies, or destroys the same, shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 3 years, or both, and shall forfeit his office and be disqualified from holding any office under the United States. So that's interesting. So that's sort of the section where people are saying he could be prohibited from ever being the president of the again. So again, that is Title 18 of the U.S. Code, Section 2071. So you see how nothing in that accuses him of espionage, working with the foreign government. It's talking about how these documents were handled. Another part of this that was cited is, again, Title 18, Section 793, subsection E. Again, that's part of the Espionage Act. Title 18, Section 793, subsection E. Whoever having unauthorized possession of, access to, or control over any document, writing, code book, signal book, sketch, photograph, photographic negative, blueprint, plan, map, model, instrument, appliance, or note relating to the national defense, or information relating to the national defense, which information the possessor has reason to believe could be used to the injury of the United States or to the advantage of any foreign nation, willfully communicates, delivers, transmits, or causes to be communicated, delivered, or transmitted, or attempts to communicate, deliver, transmit, or cause to be communicated, delivered, or transmitted, the same to any person not entitled to receive it, or willfully retains the same, and fails to deliver it to the officer or employee of the United States entitled to receive it shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 10 years or both. So this particular part of the title, Title 18, Section 793, subsection E, again, it has the possibility in there that someone willfully transmits, classified document in this example, to a foreign entity. But it also includes people who maybe didn't willfully transmit it or allowed for the possibility of transmission of that document to a foreign entity. So hopefully that gives you a little bit better insight into the exact sections of criminal code, federal criminal code, that the search warrant was carried out under, and that's why people refer to the Espionage Act when they refer to what act the former president, could be charged under. It doesn't mean that he's being accused of espionage, because there are a lot of elements under that particular code that don't talk about willful espionage or willful efforts to help a foreign power. That's it for today's episode of Undivided. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your continuing commitment to give common sense a comeback. If you have not become an Undivided subscriber already, please do so. You can do that for $5 a month on Patreon or Locals. That's patreon.com/undivided or brandikruse.locals.com. You can become a contributor there. And thank you to the fabulous founding sponsor of Undivided, 1530 Mortgage. Visit them at 1530mortgage.com.